Aloha and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's edition of Philosophy in the Forest. I'm Shasta, and I'm coming to you from the Puna district of Hawaii's Big Island. And I'm here today to talk about Book 10, Plato's Republic. And in Book 10, it's very interesting because Plato offers one of the harshest criticisms of poetry and paintings and representational art that is still continued today. And Plato actually argues that poetry should be regulated because it's harmful to the production of a well ordered city state, and that poetry and lyrical music actually has this hypnotic effect on people where it causes them to be disoriented and to behave in ways that are both antisocial and outside of reality. So, some of these things are really interesting because you can think of the way that the media blame Marilyn Manson for the mass shootings that happened at Columbine, or even the way that Helter Skelter by the Beatles was actually cited by the Manson family, and the White Album by the Beatles actually was cited by the Manson family as having a corrupting effect and perhaps inspiring them to commit these vicious acts of murder. And Plato argues that it's this lyrical pentameter and the rhythm of poetry that actually hypnotizes people, and that it's so dangerous and actually useless. And Plato also is a very harsh critic of visual art. And he thinks that visual art is actually detrimental and inferior to real craftsmanship and carpenter's work, because this art is representational and it's not realistic. And Plato is critical because he says that the work of poets and painters actually falls short of the divine work of the creator. And Plato actually calls painters imitators. And he makes fun of them because he says a painter can only paint a tree. They can't make a tree. And that's why a painter is always going to be inferior to someone who creates something like a carpenter or someone who practices a real craft. And Plato does not believe that fiction or imaginative art has any value in society. And this is really dangerous because these kind of ideas have actually been perpetuated in our society and maybe even used as an argument that we should cut arts programs in schools. And Plato's argument says that if man could produce both the original and the image, he would give himself up seriously to the manufacturing of images and make the object of his life. And this says that, the pursuit of art doesn't actually do anything. So for Plato, he has completely discredited the imagination. And later we'll see with Plato's student, Aristotle, that Aristotle is going to actually provide a critique of Book 10 and say that there is a value in fiction because it has a moral purpose. But for Plato, he thinks that fiction is immoral, and he warns people, don't read Homer. Don't listen to epic poems because they'll only lead you astray to live these lives of fantasy where you're far removed from reality. And this is interesting because today we live in a society that is so filled with screens and visual input and Netflix binging that Plato would be very critical of us. He would say that we're removed from the natural world, removed from society, that we are not able to actually think rationally because we're living in a dream world perpetuated by our imagination and these artists who are putting ideas into our heads that are maybe even not our own. And maybe these ideas to Plato also are dangerous. And he's also sort of upset with this catharsis that happens in the tragedies, whereas Aristotle will define catharsis as one of the most important things about poetry. Plato doesn't like it when people show emotion in public. So he's still this older, more stoic being. And he actually calls poetry a dreadful medium that corrupts people. And it's bad for society because it makes people miserable when they're believing in fantasies. And, you know, poets like Homer or Wes Anderson or some of our great directors like Stanley Kubrick should be completely avoided because they're leading us astray and away from reality. And for Plato, so he's just plugging philosophy the whole time in Book 10. And he's saying that philosophy is superior to everything. And that's his real argument, that philosophy is superior to painting and poetry because the philosopher is continually searching for the truth. And it's the truth that creates this well ordered and perfect city state. And that citizens who live in an ideal state, they should avoid poetry because these fantasies, they take them away from truth. And truth is inherently good. So, in order to live in a pure and moral society, one must always pursue truth and reason and a well reflected life. And Plato thinks that this is what leads us to happiness. And he praises philosophy as a worthwhile pursuit because it's impartial and logical and it makes people happy to be this way. So the sun is setting here in Hawaii and the moon is out, and I wish you all aloha and good night. Thank you for listening.